everybody, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust, out here on the Gettysburg battlefield on a hot day. And it would have been hot during the battle, and it would have been hot a few days later, specifically July 6th, 1863, when Alexander Gardner and his crew of 2 other photographers came out to this location, and they were confronted with scenes of horror, ones that people wrote about before, but the photographers hadn't quite captured, at least not in this proliferation. For there were bodies right behind me over here. There was another line back there. There were several lined up for burial over there. There were behind the camera, further behind the camera, a mangled corpse, others in the woods over here. And there were so many bodies, a total of 44, that Gardner and his men got to work. Now, at some point, they came right over here, and they recorded a photo of several Confederate bodies right lined up around this rock. And I will point to a particular crack in this rock right here as a way that you can see that this boulder was here. We might call it a witness boulder, okay? And it witnessed not only the scenes of the battle, not only, hundreds of years of civilization around this particular place, but also Alexander Gardner setting his camera up just where Andy Poulton behind the camera is setting his up to record this particular photo with these bodies and more boulders in the background. Now, as for how we know this was taken here on the Rose Farm, I'll bring in Tim Smith, the official historian for Adams County, as well as Adams County Historical Society.
Well, these photographs received quite a bit of attention as part of Miller's Photographic History of the Civil War that was published in 1911. At first, all these photographs were not seen as being connected. They were kind of disconnected. And in one caption, they were the dead of the 1st Minnesota. In another caption, they were dead near the angle. On another caption, these were dead of the 24th Michigan. And it was young William Frassanito who actually looked at these photographs and for the first time realized that this was one group of photographs. It was largely based upon one soldier that had a bent knee. And in the background of one of these images, he realized that there was a distinctive rock. So he came to the battlefield and he looked at McPherson's Woods near where the 24th Michigan fought, the angle, or where the 1st Minnesota fought, and he thought he'd be able to find the rock, but it was at none of those locations, and it ended up in almost a decade-long search. Years he searched for this boulder, and he finally found it in 1967. He brought out his photographs and he lined all these photographs up. In the 1960s, he published a book in 1975, Gettysburg, A Journey in Time. And in that book, he constructs how Alexander Gardner came to this site and recorded these photographs. And it's just a really dramatic story. We call that rock today the Split Rock because of the split in the diabase boulders.
And before Frassanito even found it, he had realized, because of the guy with the bent knee who's photographed from that direction, that direction, that direction, and this direction, that he could figure it out, almost creating a virtual reality in his mind, if only he could find the site. And once he found the split rock, all the other rocks lined up perfectly, and he was able to publish his work. Now, we're going to make our way over to this second one. Note that these were graves at one time. They would have buried the soldiers here, but these soldiers, at least as best as we understand, would have been exhumed and moved to Confederate cemeteries in the South as unidentified piles of bones. We'll talk about that sad fact shortly. Here we've moved just a few steps away, and we're looking to the scene of where a line of bodies were located, including the guy with the bent knee, and it is right next to this rock over here. Now, I mentioned just now that, to the best of our knowledge, these soldiers would have been buried where they fell and then later moved south. Here we have evidence of it. We have one photo taken from this location that shows one number of bodies, and then in another, a body is actually missing, implying, of course, that the burial operations, while this photo series was being recorded, was actually being conducted. So they were actually burying soldiers while Gardner was developing and preparing his plates for the next shot. This stuff was unprecedented. It was only 8 or 9 months before, or 10 months before, Alexander Gardner had been the first American photographer to secure photos of dead on an American battlefield. And it shocked the nation, absolutely. They'd never seen things like this before, but the rules weren't established. Is this okay to come out? I'm not sure if the soldiers knew, but I know that Gardner knew what he wanted, and he's a photojournalist, and securing the human carnage on a battlefield after people have written about it and painted about it for so long, that was among his goals.
And you know, his captions for his photographs are very vague. And this undoubtedly led to the idea later where people were placing these dead at different locations instead of just this location. And we should mention the photographs aren't dated. So there's some speculation as to exactly what date Alexander Gardner recorded and his crew recorded these photographs. It's probably, you know, somewhere between July 6th and July 8th. I don't know how Gary feels about the dating issue, but you know, burial crews are operational, and I think we located several accounts of burial operations near Devil's Den and on like July 9th. So we know he recorded photographs of dead here, and then also near Devil's Den. Now I should mention that all this area that we're standing in is part of the Rose Farm. A guy named George Rose owned this property at the time of the battle, about 240 acres. Now he had bought it from a guy named Jacob Benner, and he had got it from Jacob Sherfig or Sherfy. And the Sherfy family first came here in the 1790s. The house was probably, the stone house was probably built around the 1820, although we don't have real tax records that give us an exact date. And at one time, Jacob Sherfig owned not just this area, but the wheat field and Devil's Den and the Valley of Death. And on the second day of the battle, some 25,000 northern and southern troops crossed this ground, and on this Sherfig Rose Farm property, there were somewhere around 9,000 casualties on the second day of the battle. So I haven't done a farm-by-farm analysis of the entire Civil War, but to me, this is probably the bloodiest single farm in all of American history.
I would also add that we refer to one of the men here as Bentney, okay? We don't know his name. We don't even know his unit. And I want to talk about that a little bit at our next stop. But, you know, for now, I tend to think that this is closer to July 6th. I think Frassanito presents some good evidence that it probably is earlier at that time. But to me, here we have an opportunity not only to see the burial operations here and embrace the horror of what we're really seeing in these photos, but also to look out toward the scene of the largest attack at Gettysburg. It is not Pickett's charge, but rather it is the attack on the second day from Seminary and Warfield Ridges out toward famous places: Devil's Den, Little Round Top, the Rose Farm, the Peach Orchard, the Wheat Field, and Cemetery Ridge. 16,000 Confederates on our full field of vision coming through here. And it's somewhat ironic that these photos of the dead are not taken at the Wheat Field and the famous places such as Devil's Den and Little Round Top, but rather as a nondescript place, which until Frassanito placed them here, people really never considered the casualty figures. And I'll talk about the fighting soon. Here we are just a few feet away again. This is the same rock we pointed to before, and the same line of bodies, the ones that are actually undergoing burial operations, are right here, okay? In the background of the two photos taken here, one a little closer to the rock over here that actually shows the tip of this rock, and one looking more a little bit this way, you can not only see the line of bodies that include the guy with the bent knee, but also where we started, the first line of bodies over near that cracked rock over there. In addition, you can see Alexander Gardner's darkroom wagon, him, Timothy O'Sullivan, and James Gibson all rotated throughout of it, and about a third of the photos here are credited to each one: Gardner, Gibson, and O'Sullivan. While the other one prepared plates and another one might have been setting up the camera, they really worked well as a team, and their production here at Gettysburg is substantial, okay? In the background of the photo as well, we get our first ever views of the Peach Orchard. The Peach Orchard off in the distance there is visible for the first time in these particular photographs, even though you're only seeing really treetops over there, okay? As for what happens here, because we're looking at the Peach Orchard and we showed you Seminary Ridge, this is Hood's division, McLaw's division, and Anderson's division. These are from Longstreet's Corps and A.P. Hill's Corps, and they're going to attack the famous places I already mentioned here. Now we have burial information, okay? We have a burial map, but more helpful is we have what went with sort of the soldiers, you know, and what was found with them and things like that when they were disinterred, okay? The language is frustratingly vague. We know a lot of soldiers from South Carolina, Kershaw's brigade, were buried over near the Rose House, which is right over the hill there, okay? We also know that during the fighting, Kershaw's men fell back here. We have Semmes's Georgians coming forward here. We have Anderson's Georgians falling back in this area as well. And for my money, while we always thought it was sort of Semmes's men coming across the field that might have suffered as members of John Rutter Brooks' brigade shoot into them, the more I read the burial records, I think it might be a mix of Georgians, Semmes's brigade as well as Anderson's Georgia brigade, the leftmost elements of which might have been around here, okay? We don't know, so there's no dog tags in the Civil War, so unfortunately we have to continue to call this man Bent Knee because we can only guess at his unit and really have no idea of his identity. Tim?
Well, you know, we also should mention that when William Frassanito discovered this site and then published his first book in 1975, and there's a follow-up book he did in 1995, and I know a lot of the American Battlefield Trust fans are probably also fans of William Frassanito, but his discovery of these photographs and the fact that the rocks are still here today actually allowed the National Park Service to move the tree line back to its historic position. And today we kind of get a better idea of where Brooks' brigade was. When I first visited the site, and I'm going to say in 1979 with William Frassanito's book, this was wooded. And I'm going to guess, and Gary can help me out here, I think Gary and I together came to the site first in 1989 together. And it was much different then than it is now. And besides all the other things we talk about, the discovery of the locations of these images help us restore the battlefield to its battle appearance.
Let's walk over here before we really leave, and let's walk over just real quick, Andy, to the split rock over here in case people want to get a close-up view of it. Let me just note that we'll talk about the horror of what death might mean as well as we can, but for now, imagine I am hot in this outfit right now, and it is not as hot as it was during the battle. We know that soldiers rode of a heat index or a real feel in the 90s, and it was hot after the battle as well. Add to that the thousands of dead horses in this area, and we see 44 bodies, but we know there's, you know, some 10 more over near the Rose Farm, and we know there's a whole lot more in these woods here. Just imagine what the heat and these conditions, rain and not rain, must have done to the smell at this place as we move to the next spot. Now here we are at the site where presumably friends behind Confederate lines may have begun to lay out their dead comrades for burial, okay? It's also conceivable that the Union soldiers did this before they came in and buried them, but either way, for whatever reason, in dragging them together so they could dig more efficient trenches, they are going to gather them together, and these were put into a V formation, okay? This is what Frassanito called it, and anybody can see that there's two lines coming together to the point. The point comes together right behind me over here, but this shot looks actually up. Now, you might look at this and say, well, this doesn't look like the photo. I can't see much of the distant ridge. That is because, and probably because of livestock and because of the disinterment of so many bodies in one spot, that we're standing lower. There's been a lot of erosion here, and I think that has a lot to do with why we're not quite seeing the same scene in the background. Now, if we come over here, you can actually see some of that erosion, and we'll go to another photo. If Andy could stand right here-ish. I'm always bossy like this when it comes to Civil War photography. You know, you might be able to catch part of that rock in this photo there, and at the same time, you might be able to catch that rock over there. So there's Andy working it out, I see, okay? And you are now looking up the V formation. And in the photo, if we zoom in, you can see a lot of the other bodies and corpses we've already talked about in this particular video, okay? So here's yet another view. And again, we are walking in the footsteps of the photographer, okay? This is not an upper. And sometimes people might accuse those of us who study the Civil War photographs of doing something disrespectful? I completely disagree. This is sometimes the best way we can come to understand somebody. By studying them, you can not only learn what they wore, what it looked like, but sometimes by determining when and where a photo was, you can identify their unit. Maybe that's the best we can do for them, okay? These are almost certainly Georgians, but there might be South Carolinians in there as well. So we're looking at the V now from two different locations, but now we're going to cut real quick as we walk over to the head of the formation, to the most famous of the whole group.
This is probably the more famous of the images that was taken on the Rose Farm. And it's kind of interesting that this image, I believe by 1867, was being used as a stereo card, and it was captioned, "Dead of the 24th Michigan." And of course, this was said to be McPherson's Ridge on the first day's battlefield. Of course, the problem with that is there's no rocks like we have in the background here at that location, and they're Confederate dead and not Union dead. But that caption has stuck. And every year, there are books that come out on the Civil War and use this photograph and still maintain it's dead of the 24th Michigan. So although us photographic nerds are really into this, maybe the general public is not as interested in these images.
And now we're actually going to walk northward across the Rose Fields, over beyond where we started, to see more of Gardner's work. Here we are with another line of corpses right here, and it can almost become sort of normalized or rote almost, that here's another line of corpses and another line of corpses. I want to stress that there is on average 4 wounded for every soldier killed in the Battle of Gettysburg, and just because this one was photographed and not yet cleared of its dead doesn't make it of any particular import compared to the others, okay? I'm not saying it's not important, but if I look at the Rose Farm, the Peach Orchard, the Wheat Field, and Devil's Den, there would have been scenes like this all over the place. But these are the ones Gardner photographed. These are the ones with the rocks in the background, some of which you can still see to this day, and these are the ones with some of the sadder sights, soldiers face pressed to the earth in complete opposition of what was considered a good 19th century death, when you would be at home among loved ones. Here they are far from home, and it's going to get even sadder. Tim?
When I first came out here, and again, I was holding William Frassanito's book, and he was the one who discovered the location of these photographs. And of course, you know, he's a good friend of the Battlefield Trust today. And some of the things in his book just really grabbed me. And his description of this line of soldiers, and specifically the guy at the end of the line, as he was being dragged into position, he was probably a little bloated, his pants snapped, and his pants kind of were pulled down. And according to Frassanito, here then was a young man who only 3 days prior advanced in battle, full of life, and presumably fighting for the ideals he considered worthy of noble sacrifice. But by July 5th, or July 6th, on the field of Gettysburg, he was just another nameless corpse, his face pressed against the earth, his exposed buttocks once carefully hidden in accordance with the vanities of civilization, a sign of war's ultimate glory. And we should mention that Fras had served in Vietnam and came home and wrote this book.
Wow. Yeah, and a lot of people don't give him credit. He's a photo historian, but he can be a wonderful writer and evocative too. And I think we're going to go to the most terrible of all the photos next. Here we have the location of what has to be one of the most grotesque, evocative, and sad images of the Civil War, so much that Alexander Gardner recorded a photo with his twin lens camera so that you could view it in 3D later, as well as with a close-up plate, okay? This is a soldier who has really succumbed to the horrors of putrefaction. His eyes are bulging out, his face is bloated, his hand is detached, and something has disemboweled him. People don't know, they estimate, and guess that maybe it was a shell that disemboweled him. And sometimes Gardner actually used language like that in other captions. And some would suggest that it could be an animal that was disemboweling him here. But you can see his ribs. And on top of that, Gardner went and placed a rifle across him, may have placed his hand, put an artillery shell next to him, and actually put a canteen there. And as he shot one, he moved some of those things around, including the canteen, for the second shot as well. He appears as an indistinct form in the farthest away shot looking back this way. You can not only see the guy with the exposed buttocks, but as an indistinct white form sort of right here. We're seeing a lot of taller grasses here. When it's lower, you have a much better view of a lot of what's happening in this vicinity here. Now, before I move on as well, you can say when we look from here, we can also see the two rocks at the edge of the woods we pointed out earlier. Maybe we'll zoom in on the old photo. But before I hand this over to Tim, after Gettysburg, A Journey in Time came out, Frassanito had known that there was another photo of dead of South Carolinians, supposedly, over somewhere in this area. He eventually secured a copy of it and talked about it in his 1995 update, Early Photography at Gettysburg, a masterpiece. You really do need it if you're interested in this stuff. And it is right over in that area, looking sort of generally southward along the fence, showing several more bodies, also right over there. There's nothing distinct, so we're not going to go over there today. But I think Tim has more to say in his own and Frassanito's words about this terrible scene.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to mention that if you're interested in this subject that we've been talking about, we have a William Frassanito special exhibit at the Adams County Historical Society in our Gettysburg Beyond the Battle Museum, and we highlight the discovery of the images here on the Rose Farm. And, you know, again, you know, I grew up reading William Frassanito's book and learning about the battle and Civil War photography through him. So I thought I'd read one more quote about this particular body. There is nothing quite like a name to impart the personalized horror of war. Without a name, it is all too easy to view this mutilated corpse as an object, as merely one of the countless reminders that war is, in the final analysis, the most disgusting of obscenities. And yet, this object was a human being. The young man seen here has undoubtedly been perceived countless times over the past century as a vague non-entity, a corpse, more awesome and revolting than real. We may look upon this photograph with disgust and say to ourselves, war is horrible, but we quickly forget. Somewhere down in Georgia, at the very moment Gardner's negative was being exposed, a family anxiously awaited news of this soldier's fate, hoping he had survived yet another battle unscathed. For that family, the true horror of war would never be forgotten.
I just want to say, as we come to a close of Gettysburg 162, you know, we have enjoyed interacting with you. We've liked most of your comments, you know, and you can have fun on a battlefield. You can be interested and amazed and recreate on a battlefield as well. But in the end, we all have to remember in the final analysis that this is one of the things that happened here. Did it come to an outcome that helped move our country along? These are some of the questions we have to ask with these sacrifices all over the place. So we hope that you'll think more about this. We hope you'll go check out the exhibit at the Adams County Historical Society. Maybe make your way out to the Rose Farm here. They have an exhibit out on Brook Avenue where you can actually see and learn about it without actually coming through the tick-infested weeds over here. But we hope that you'll dive into this a little bit more. I really want to thank Andy Poulton behind the camera. It is hot out here. I want to thank Tim Smith for coming out. I want to thank William A. Frassanito for setting up a whole field of study that changed my life, that changed Tim's life, that has changed a lot of your lives as well. And we really appreciate you joining us on Gettysburg 162 for all of this video coverage. Thanks for all you do for battlefield education and preservation.